Hello and welcome to this episode of Unscripted. I'm joined now by James Tucker, who is the CEO of GovNet. And uh, James, first of all, welcome to this Unscripted.
Thanks very much.
We should have a good time. Look, just so that everybody knows our background, James and I met because we're on a advisory panel to a event tech company. We won't mention the name, but we always share a shared view about how tech should be applied, especially around data and so on. And in one of the presentations that I gave, I made the point that there is no such thing as event tech. There is just tech. And that there is tech that is way more impactful to your event business than what I would call event tech, experience tech, and so on. We're going to go on that in a second. But I invited James along because I think his story is amazing. Not only you don't come from an event background, so that gives you a different lens on everything. And I feel like you guys have done a very good job of maximizing HubSpot operationally, organizationally, to get advantage as well. First of all, I'd like to thank you for joining me, but also just start talking to me about your background, how you arrived, and then we'll go into the deeper exploration around the application of tech within an events business.
Yeah, so my background, as you said, was not in events. So I came from the finance world. Obviously, the finance world is pretty data-driven to the point where you actually spend your entire day staring at spreadsheets and changing spreadsheets to forecast stuff. So it was always kind of like a passion of mine, I guess. And then coming into an events business that didn't really have any tech, like GovNet at the time didn't really have any BI. Tech stack was a bit of a running joke amongst the teams. So was the hardware, to be fair, but we're mainly focusing on like software and that sort of stuff today, and kind of having to take it from chaos to quite a clean place where we really use data and insight to infer preferences and interest and drive return for the guys who attend our events. It's been quite an amazing journey. I think I'm probably, for better and worse, quite unique in my role as a CEO, as kind of the person who's driven that most of that change, because I'm a bit of a lunatic about this stuff. It's why we get on quite well, but I tend to have a very specific view of how things should work, and there are advantages to that in that it means that you don't end up with that kind of committee vision on what your tech stack should look at. There's also been some kind of downsides as well, as I've had to extract myself from kind of being involved in the day today on the tech side. But yeah, I'm sure we can talk through that.
Yeah, but I suppose what you hit on just then is there is a real need to make sure that you are working with the right vision or towards the right vision. Otherwise, you can get lost in all of this so quickly.
Yeah, I think it does help to ask people what they want, but that can't really be the starting point. I think it does help to have one person, whether you're starting out from scratch on this stuff or you're kind of trying to make a change. It does help to have one person who's really driving that vision through. They should listen and care and try and make the right choices for people in the business, but someone has to be the steward of that vision. Like, what is that going to do for customers at the end? And then the structure should kind of fall off that. Perhaps I just say, just to kind of, because we'll go into this a bit as we go along, like what GovNet does by and large is we run trade shows and conferences for healthcare, schools, and tech. A lot of your listeners will be kind of familiar with that model. So we have an audience, and the events are largely monetized through the exhibitors and sponsors.
So this has always been one of my, actually, James, I'm going to stop it here. One of the things that I always find, and again, you picked out while we got on, when I was running a media business, I always had a very, very clear vision of what the tech should do. And for me, the tech is always about maximizing the end product. And the end product is the audience in a way, right? If you take away the audience, you don't have an end product. And what I find a little bit about, as we go into HubSpot, what I really liked about HubSpot, and I used it a couple of times, they came into the market disrupting this whole CRM space, but they came in at it in a very audience acquisition centric world. And that gives you just some very, very unique opportunities to nurture and personalize. And I always find it very frustrating. And look, it may be a false positive because I consult with some very small media businesses. When I get called in, things are a mess anyway, right? So I have to bear that in mind. But it almost feels like sometimes the activation of technology, it's like, let's buy some tech and see what we can do, rather than what's our real problem and how can we align technology behind solving that problem, and how can we be operationally more efficient? Because when we were talking just in prepping for this podcast, you told me about when you started, how many CRMs did you have? I mean, it was like double digits.
Yeah, I think we had 13 CRMs. It was like 27 sources of data. There was a 12-person data team whose job was not to provide any info or insight, just to move stuff from one to another. There was one of the worst CRMs that actually did most of the work, was made by someone that left 6 years ago that no one could remember how to get in touch with. And I think when the machine it was on in one of the offices, someone spilled a drink on it, you just lose all your data. So it's a precarious situation at the time.
This is before the days of crowd computing, when kicking a server could kind of buy you an afternoon in the pub.
Or bring down your entire business.
True. And I mean, when you explain to me about the difference of the mindset, because obviously you don't arrive at that situation because you necessarily want to be there, but it does seem to be something about the events business where the entire energy is into the logistics of the organization, and that takes such a high priority because it's such a big part of the cost base, I suppose, that this understanding of how to activate technology to deliver personalized journeys is, I think, something because that's why you took the lead, right?
What you said before is right. Most CRMs fundamentally do the same thing, but HubSpot started off as a marketing platform before it was a CRM. Not many people know that, but its fundamental purpose at the beginning was to create a platform that allows people to be good at content marketing specifically. So it always had tracking touch points and tracking page views and being able to have that single customer view of what your audience is doing with your websites and on site as well. But we kind of had to do that ourselves. It always had that at the core of the product. It was actually much better at that before it had a sales pipeline, before it had any of the stuff that we would typically associate with the CRM now, and all the stuff that has added on later. So the challenge for us at GovNet was really the marketing thing needed to be dealt with. So we were quite old school, like buy data, send email, buy data, send email. If you're a bit behind on reg, send a few more email. So it was that challenge that we wanted to fix through choosing where we went with tech, and then it all kind of spiraled from there. And I think the great thing about out of the box best of breed platforms is that you can kind of grow with them. So as they change, like HubSpot's changed a huge amount since even we started using it 4 years ago. I used to invest in it when I was running a US tech stock fund 10 years ago, and I used to pretend I knew what it was, and I didn't because I wasn't a user. But I've been on the cab, so I've fed into their product ever. It's quite amazing how these businesses can change over time.
And that gives also an opportunity, right? Because in a way, we'd be remiss not to touch on the current buzzword of AI. And, I get asked, and it's like, hey, how can we use AI? And in one of the blog posts I wrote, and I said, like, don't worry, it'll come to you. And solutions like HubSpot and the others out there are much better equipped to see where the opportunities are and put them into certainly the audience acquisition and marketing stack than I would say some of the more event tech companies who, you can send an email from them, but they're not email marketing services providers, and personalization is such a big part of that.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like the way I always think about it is the CRM should always be at the core of your tech stack. This probably won't go down well with some listeners, but the event app or whatever you choose kind of sits around that. We view that as a more changeable part, whereas it's very unlikely that we would change our CRM. And the data structure in the event apps is based around the structure that's in the CRM. So that bit comes first. And I think that's what businesses like HubSpot have. And if you roll that across their entire client base, they're seeing how marketers and salespeople acquire business or acquire an audience in the example of events across every single channel, every single sector, every single country in the world. So they are able, I think, to really understand the application of AI in a way that it's really going to help people. They've always been super UX focused as well. So like, I think we all understand what AI is and what it can do, but all of us are sort of waiting to see how it's going to change our daily tasks and our daily processes. And I think someone that has built their platform around changing the users' journeys and changing the users' lives is more likely to find some very good, simple use cases for AI than someone kind of pretending to do it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. One of the things that impressed me when HubSpot first came out was their attention to detail on the UX UI front, because other systems genuinely just look like a database and you're filling out forms. Whereas I found that HubSpot actually had a design language that was linked to making people use it. I'm going to go back to something you said earlier. You were describing a real world paradigm that still exists. We are behind on numbers, or we're running an event. What's the solution? The solution is always email. Right. And I exaggerate, but by and large it is, because it's one you can activate all the time. And this industry is so email centric in terms of its thinking, in terms of its acquisition sources. I mean, I tot it up. There are 28 legitimate acquisition sources, but they all come with their different pains and so on. How did you move from reducing your concentration on email and that mindset into using HubSpot and leveraging, like you said, they look at everything and they're putting it in. But just because you've got the tech doesn't mean that it gets maximized. What I'm basically saying is, how do you get over it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to have it all in one place for a start. And this is where these platforms help, because you're always going to be able to neglect channels that you might see as slightly more complex or harder to move if you can't see them in the same place and you can't see the impact of them. Like if you're using a separate platform for social or PPC than you're using for email, and in the place where you're tracking your results, you can't see, well, this channel is doing that, that channel is doing that, that channel is doing that. There is no way you're going to be able to judge why your campaign is behind, why your campaign is ahead, what I need to do and what levers I can pull to get it on track. So you have to have it all in one place. And I think that's the secret to this stuff. And it's only recently you've been able to do that. Like if you go back probably 5 or 6 years, we all had to have Hootsuite and we all had to have an email platform. We all had to run our BBC directly on ads. And unless your marketers were insanely good at UTM tracking setup, it was unbelievably unlikely you would have that visibility. But these platforms make it pretty straightforward now.
Yeah, they do, and they're all becoming much more open. I mean, GA4 has, people moan about it, but the killer app that they've opened up is that you can now get the data flows. I mean, our intelligence product relies quite heavily on that, and you're right, it just pulls everything together.
No, you're right.
You need to be able to see it all in one place, and you need to be able to activate it right from there.
And it's also understanding, I think, like it's not just knowing that like that email has driven that registration, for example. It's being able to look into a bit more detail, look at the patterns of behaviors across different channels, including your website, to be able to drive higher conversion. If you think about emails, an inherently untargeted tool, really, like you're sending someone something at a time that suits you, hoping that at the time that suits them to receive it and convert. Like, it doesn't deliver anything like what you can achieve with a more kind of personalized journey.
I mean, absolutely. And you got to have some empathy of realizing where those triggers are and things like that, which is why the email platforms have now put in smart sense. And, the things don't arrive at midnight in your inbox when you're in the US and so on. But I do want to go back to getting some advice out of you in terms of the journey of starting to create a modern alignment of technology to the outcome of delivering great events. And the outcome of delivering great events is high levels of participations between sponsors and participants and so on. That's the core of it, really. It's pretty simple. And I see this in my work. Struggle with it because I feel like there is an abdication of responsibility around the core driving product that glues it all together. For you, it's HubSpot. My view is the database, but that's kind of saying the same thing. And it's so hard when it gets abdicated to, let's say, a tech consultant or something like that, to actually layer the process change and the thinking change that will get you the maximum value. So do you think the CEO always needs to be involved? Because I know you're a bit of an outlier, you drove it all.
Yeah. I think whoever leads the project needs to have a very clear view of where it's going to end up. And it is about where it's going to end up. Like, not about going and having lunches with tech suppliers. It's not about running some sort of cost benefit analysis per se. Like, it is about understanding exactly what behavior you're trying to drive at your shows. And that needs to be pure. And it helps if it's held by one person, right? It doesn't have to be the CEO, but the CEO should probably buy in, and lots of other people in the business should buy in. But you've got to forget the tech to start off with. Like, it has to be, what am I trying to do at my event? And then everything else feeds off that. If you're trying to get more people to meet with the right people in certain places, your tech stack will feed off that. Your data structures will feed off that. The platforms that you choose will feed off what you're trying to do. It's about reminding people a lot of the time. Like, you end up repeating yourself an insane amount of times through these change management processes. It requires a bit of patience sometimes, but it's relentlessly banging the drum of, like, this is why we're doing this. This is what the end goal is going to be. This is why we're doing this. This is what the end goal is going to be, again and again and again. But yeah, I think it helps to have one person driving it. Yeah. So, like, start there and then go and find your tech and really think about the specific behaviors, whether it's like, what would the dashboard look like that my teams are going to see to show this is working? Like, what are the KPIs going to be that we measure? And then think about the customer journey as well. Like, what would they need to see to get them to behave in the way I want them to behave, or for their benefit as well? I mean, you're not going to do it unless it's for their benefit. So you should have that as a prerequisite. The tech comes later. I completely agree on that.
You do hear this from people saying, "Oh, I'm not technical. This is a technical." No, this is not a technical project. You do not have to be technical to create that vision map, have simple customer journeys that you'd like to ideally. You might not know how. And for the how, you may want to get specialist consultants in, but they will do a better job if they know the why and what you're trying to create, and they'll do it. Because otherwise, what happens is you get consultants in way too early, and they just design what they know, but it may not work for you.
Yeah, you have to start with that. Right? The worst thing you can do is go the other way, which is to go meet a few suppliers. They all show you the slide deck rather than actually showing you the product. You pick the benefits that you think sound better than the other ones, and then hope it delivers some outcomes that you haven't defined yet. Like that, to be honest, absolutely mental compared to just thinking, I want more of these people to be matched with more of these people, and I want them to meet face to face here, and that's all I care about.
And when you started talking like this, did it make sense in your business, or were people just looking at you like going,
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I ever really, like the outcomes, I think people understand. I don't expect people to understand necessarily the kind of data structures and things like that that drive that. And as long as they understand why we're driving these outcomes, I mean, it does come into play later. So when, for example, you have to lock things down and stop people changing things because they change their mind all the time and they complain, they say, well, why can't I have this new field on the reg form? You do have to remind them that data structures are important and consistent because remember that our data structures drive this. So you can link it back. I think you do have to get people to buy into that way of thinking. You need to be prepared to tell politely a lot of people to go away and no, you can't have what you want. And that, I think that's another reason it takes like someone relatively strong and empowered within a business to drive that. I think I was pretty lucky that I could kind of tell people what to do without recourse. I'm aware that not everyone is in that position. So getting that buy-in from your team or your board or the business as a whole before you start. And I think pre-warning them, like, politely, I'm going to be a dick a few times and I'm going to tell you no, and I'll explain why. But you need to be prepared for that, like kind of before you start these processes, warns people that it's coming.
and this is where having the anchor of the outcome clearly defined in a non-technical language, but you know what you're trying to get. Because you're right, what you knew was the right thing to do and push it back. But what's the sort of some of the advice that you would give to someone who's maybe leading this change project, and this is a real world scenario. Someone comes up and says, hey, you know what, guess what, I've just sold a sponsorship to blah, and they're going to pay us £1 quadrillion of money, and I've told them that we can put another field on the registration form and ask 5 more questions.
I mean, I'd say give the revenue back, but you need to be prepared to say that. I know that's not that easy, but yeah, you've got to be purist and disciplined about this stuff.
So the message is you really do have to be that committed and that hard to, if a situation arises where it is really breaking alignment, you have courage of your conviction to give revenue back.
Yeah, the same way that if we would give revenue back if someone wanted to sponsor one of our events and we didn't think they added anything to the audience, it was quite a step change for us. Like, I think people were used to be able to do what they want from a sales team perspective, and to say that you do want some flexibility, but when it comes to the core data structures that drive engagement at our events, absolutely not.
And going back to those core data structures and leveraging the maximum of a very powerful solution like HubSpot, what else did you have to do? I mean, people always say it's like people, process, technology, but it's easier said than done, especially in a small business. You're moving quite quickly and so on. But what was the sort of level of training that needed to be put in? What was I suppose the question I'm asking, how long did it take for the vision that was in your head to be actualized? Is it years? Did you manage to brute force it through in 6 months? Or what was all of that like?
Yeah, I think we got it done quite quickly. Partly, I think COVID helped a little bit of that. So there was a little bit of necessity driving it, which I think helped remove some excuses. I think I'm a user, right? I'm not a tech person. As soon as you start to speak to me about coding language or stuff like that, you've lost me completely. I was never asking anyone to do what I couldn't do myself. Like, we built HubSpot out of the box and thought about a path of least resistance. So how can we use this to save our team's time, to get rid of all the jobs they don't like doing, to make it so they can just spend more of their time focusing on the cool stuff, the stuff they want to be doing more of. And I think because we approach it like that, it kind of naturally, we're quite lucky we've got good teams that just picked it up and ran with it. So a lot of training up the front, a lot of trust built up. So like, I'm not asking you to do anything that I can't do. I've done all this. This is how I would use it, but find your own way. And then as long as you've got a platform that doesn't need too much training, I think this is what you're really asking is like, are people picking good platforms? I do fundamentally believe the best platforms are ones that users will find their way through and they'll work out the benefits for themselves. Like if you have to sit there and go through an insane onboarding process and they won't just give you the keys, the chances are there's a couple of little things in there that don't quite work as they say they can. But yeah, empowering them to take it where they want to take it and just repeating yourself over and over again.
I know what you're saying, and I think it is one of those things where I kind of feel that if you are going to, in the context of a small business, I'm not talking about 10,000 employees or so I can't even fathom how you would do anything like that in that sort of organization. But in a small business, it's that empowerment and it's that willingness for people to just jump in and use it. And you're right. In order to facilitate that, the platform has got to invite that sort of behavior. So that's important. And I agree with you. Like any platform that you buy and they go, oh, okay, yeah, we're going to run you through a month-long training program. There's probably something wrong with the UX and how it works. But the question I'm trying to get to is, in order to use tech and maximize out, you need a certain type of mindset and a certain type of person who will engage like that. Did you have to do any work on that front, or were you just really lucky that you just had people who were desperate to do this themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the marketing side, you tend to have pretty tech focused people, so they really ran with it. Not everyone across our business would say they are a tech person. We've always had that in mind. So we want this to work regardless of whether you are a lunatic like me or whether you're like the one that prefers to use a notepad, right? Like we want our tech to work for you regardless of how kind of good you think you are at tech. And I do think you kind of have to do that. You do notice some people certainly just get it straight away. And I guess in an ideal world, they become your super users. So those are the guys who kind of drag maybe the less tech focused people with them. Those are the guys who do the training for you. Those are the guys who kind of advocate for it in the business. But yeah, I mean, we had that challenge before. I wouldn't necessarily advise anyone to do like wholesale, like go shoot all the people who don't like tech type transitions, because I don't think that's particularly good for anyone. In any business, you're going to have to cater to a range of tech sort of appetites, and it's probably better to work with that rather than work against it.
And what you have, what I call sometimes this tick box exercise, like where you're like going, hey, what do you think is good tech? Oh, it's this. Oh, right, okay, we've got it. And then it just sits there. It does get used, whatever, but it doesn't get maximized. That's my point. One of the missions that I'm on with digitizing events is how can you use tech to maximize the outcome? Otherwise, it's just sat there doing nothing. It might be recording it. Can you share just some of the, maybe in percentage terms, it's like going, how did you win? How much time did you win back? What sort of maximization did you get so that people can see what's at the end of the tunnel if you persevere?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of internal time saved, I think we did some task audits at the beginning of this process like 4 years ago. And if we look at that task makeup now, like pretty much we managed to automate 95% of the manual tasks they were doing. And that means all that time goes into creativity and finding cooler ways to serve the audience better. So like from that perspective, I think also if you look at the penetration of the information we have against our audience now, whether it's directly them telling us, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is what I like, whether we're using their web or their physical behavior to infer those preferences. I think the depths of knowledge we have against our audiences now, if you think about it as another outcome, is just increased dramatically, and that does feed into maximizing our events. The more information we have about someone, the better we believe we will be able to facilitate their needs. The better we'll be able to look after them, the better we'll be able to drive an amazing experience at an event.
Does it also give you the ability to maybe do cool things like look ahead based on audience behavior? Because I always feel like, well, the shows that I was running were in the tech market, and you always saw little bubbles of interest in the audience first before the vendors even got to it, which allows you to be a little bit ahead of the curve. Are you looking at that sort of stuff as well? Or you're not going to say?
Yeah, no, we are. So we're always, whether it's through feedback mechanisms, which go directly into our CRM, like don't go for a separate feedback platform that doesn't link to what the rest of your stuff does, because that's just criminal in my opinion. Whether it's direct feedback channels or seeing what people are starting to search or seeing which blogs get a little bit more than they used to, you do really start to see that stuff. And we do actually directly feed that back to our clients for free. Like, this is just kind of what we're seeing across the audience at the moment, and then do what you want with it. I mean, I think they should take it more seriously, because I think we've got better data than they have, to be honest.
Well, I think you're right. And that's the start of doing this thing about becoming more like market service led, which was
Yeah, right.
in a podcast with Dan as well, what they're doing in terms of actually, we're not just giving you data points in terms of interaction, like registrations for webinar, whatever, but we're wrapping that with some form of intelligence. It's your choice whether you act on it, but you're right. There's a lot more value in, these dominant niche sites will give you than sort of aggregated trends. And is that something where, again, going back to this thing about having all your data in one place, that's one of those key messages, right? That's why you do it.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the data that we have specific to our market compared to the way you would be able to segment GA, or the way you can segment LinkedIn ads or something, like the problem with these worldwide platforms is the data that they hold is worldwide. It's fairly aggregated. I can't make sure that I'm winning business for the people that are looking for that business. And really, well, Google search does that a bit. I guess you're doing on search intent, but it's not backed up by the kind of depth of data that we have. So I think that's why, apart from the importance of face-to-face, you can get a lead, but without meeting someone face-to-face and developing that personal connection, you're probably not going to do much with that lead. Apart from the face-to-face that comes from events, it is that market-specific depth and that kind of extra intelligence in the context of the way that market thinks about itself. One of the things we speak to our clients all the time is about communicating with the market in a way that they understand. So putting things in, whether it's terms or topics or phrases that are going to resonate with them, because those are the words that are used in their day jobs. And like, I think without kind of that sector focus, or without like us caring more than Google's going to care, for example, you're probably not going to have that.
No, I'd agree with that. There is quite a lot of aspiration out there by event companies. I kind of like the fact that this question is being asked, but I dislike how it's being asked. Like, hey, what's my tech stack supposed to be? If you could give someone maybe 1-2 pieces of advice where they're going, looking for tech to help their business succeed in this world, what would that be?
And I'd say, well, the first one we slightly touched on before. So start with that. I'm going to use the word CRM. It could be a database, let's say, but start with the core and think about what you want to track before you pick the apps that sit around it that are going to get that data for you. So, for example, if you want to track one-on-one meetings at your events, make sure that first you build the CRM object one-on-one meetings before you go and find an event app that can track one-on-one meetings and deliver one-on-one meetings, because it's linking that to the rest of the stuff that your clients do that's really going to drive the results. And then don't just let that information sit in the event app somewhere, because then you end up with data spread all over the place. So number one would be pick the core first before you pick the apps. Second thing is, and this is perhaps not something everyone's able to do, but like, don't believe what suppliers tell you politely. So like, ask someone to give you the keys and build it yourself, or build a little POC yourself, or just have a play around as a team. It doesn't have to be the most formal processes, but that, I think, will get you a lot further along the journey to understanding whether it actually delivers that endpoint that you want, than kind of going through slide decks or believing what people say. As well as a user, like, if that is the way you test and that is the way you build, you're going to be also bringing in, like, how easy is it for me to get my teams to do this? If someone could just go and give you the keys to a platform and then you can't work it out within 10 minutes, the chance of you being able to convince your teams who are busy as well to start to adopt this is almost zero, in my opinion. So those would be the two big things.
Do you know what? I think on that we'll leave it, because that is a lovely place to leave it. I completely agree with you, James. And James, listen, thanks again for giving me the time to help me on my mission of digitizing events through these podcasts and so on. And when I did the one with Dan, I was joking no one would listen to it, but apparently they do. So hey ho, there we go. We've got an audience, a start of it.
I'm always happy to help.
Thank you, mate.
Brilliant.
Yes.